Mike, let's get on to NFL futures. As we saw last Thursday, so earlier in May, the NFL schedule release correlating to strength of schedule pieces here and there, and people evaluating win totals off of that based on what you were discussing in terms of your horse racing handicapping strategy. I'm assuming you don't go off of previous teams' records when it comes to betting on NFL futures, especially with win totals. But one win total that I do want to discuss, just to kick things off here before we dig in a couple teams I want to dive into and then get your thoughts on those, dive into a future or two that you're looking into yourself or maybe have placed already. Bengals under 11.5 wins, and the best number available is minus 120 currently as of this recording over at BetMGM. Remember to head over to thelines.com if you want to get the best price for win total markets or whatever NFL futures market you may be trying to bet, even though it's still mid-May. It's when you can typically get the best of the number, although some may wait till August till these markets begin to settle a little bit more. So the reason why I'm looking into Cincinnati under, and then I'll get your thoughts, Mike, when you look back at last season for this Bengals defense, number one, the Bengals have had so much positive injury luck over the last couple seasons. When you think about Burrow not missing time and Joe Mixon and the receiving core, even though Chase did miss, like 3 or 4 games last season, but fairly healthy on both sides of the ball. Cornerback issues, granted, for a little bit of last season, but over the course of the last couple of years, Bengals have had a lot of positive injury luck, especially when you compare it to a team like the Ravens, which I'll get into here in a bit. But the metric that I want to dive into, the Bengals faced either below average quarterbacks, and this coming via Cleve TA on Twitter, a very good NFL follow, below average quarterbacks or backup quarterbacks straight up. 45% of their opponents ranked number 30 or below in drop back EPA in terms of quarterbacks, obviously. So that was the most in the NFL, with the Dallas Cowboys and Jacksonville Jaguars ranking second and third in that department in terms of facing the fewest quarterbacks of that regard in the 2022-2023 season. So Bengals certainly got their fair share of positive variance when it came to the opposing quarterback. And within that, when you look at where Cincinnati's pass defense ranked, 10th fewest drop back EPA in the 2022-2023 season. And then you factor in the fact that the Bengals lost their 2 starting safeties in Bates and Von Bell. So I do think you see some defensive regression overall, potentially negative injury luck for Cincinnati, maybe at the quarterback position, maybe at the running back position. Then you look at the Bengals opening slate to the season when it comes to maybe win total wise, specifically at the Browns, which I think is a pretty good spot, especially when you consider the upgrade they made on the defensive line. You get Jim Schwartz in as your defensive coordinator, even though the Browns defense has had Burrow's number with that zone coverage in years past. And then it's Baltimore in a potential revenge spot of the AFC wildcard game, where you could certainly make the case that the Ravens should have won that game outright, even without Lamar Jackson. Then you get a home game against the Rams, and then at a Titans team that may be a little undervalued in the market. So, Mike, generally speaking, how are you looking at the Bengals when it comes to back-to-back AFC championship appearances over the last couple of years and the Super Bowl appearance 2 years ago?
So I think you seized upon something right off the bat that would stand out to me about if I were looking at the under, and I don't disagree that seems to be a sound way to look at it, is that I think the start September is more difficult for them than you might think, in the sense that, again, I think Cleveland, I think will be better. With Watson in the full year, they clearly have a talented roster. I think have made some upgrades, like you said. Baltimore, we talked about injury luck, right? And so even if they have terrible injury luck again, you're still catching Baltimore early. And Baltimore did kind of tooth and nail with Cincinnati in that wild card round. It wasn't pretty, but you mentioned something interesting at the beginning. You said, you don't look at how teams, records and things like that. Well, I think the one thing I would say that I do take a look at is a team's quality in terms of drafting year over year is something that's important to me. And I think the Ravens always draft well. They're deep. You're always going to have a chance with them. And so, to me, they're certainly a good bounce back candidate. And so I don't think sweeping them is something you could count on. Even that Rams game right off the bat. Again, I think the Rams earlier than later is probably more difficult to catch them. They're not particularly deep, but I think McVay will go back to the lab, and it wouldn't be surprising at all if they started really well. So I agree with where you're coming from here. I would say that, the one the thing that does stand out to me about this schedule a little bit is that, I think there are some easy marks for the Bengals again, and they typically have been pretty good in the Burrow era, not sort of blowing those opportunities. But I'd agree with you. I think 11.5 is a little rich, particularly with Cleveland better, particularly with Baltimore better. Pittsburgh again, it's almost gospel at this point. You can pencil them in for their 8 or 9 wins. I don't know how they do it.
Right.
I think they get, but the point is they're not that division. And again, this is the division I covered all my years at Pro Football Weekly and followed all these years. And it's they don't give any quarter. And I think so. If I'm looking at a little slightly different, maybe a little older school in terms of it, but I'm with you. I think under is the way I'd go there too as well.
No, I get it. And just generally speaking with this division, it's arguably the best division in the NFL. So I thought you may go down this line of thought. Maybe you are trending that way, depending on how your futures bets go the rest of the summer months and before the season kicks off in mid-September. Browns or Ravens to win the division versus Bengals win total under, which is fair. Browns or Ravens to me potentially could win this division, where I don't want to necessarily bet it that way. But I do agree with you that the Bengals, especially in the Burrow era when they did start out slow last year, and that had more so to do with the offensive line continuity probably than anything else, they got back on track. And when their offensive line did develop, just that. So I understand your line of thinking for sure. Now, with Baltimore in particular, I made a bet on them already because this was the only price available currently in mid-May at 25-1 over at Caesars Sportsbook. And again, head over to thelines.com if you want to get the best of the number on Super Bowl futures markets or the like. I bet 25-1 because it's the last 25-1 available, and every single number seems to be trending towards 18-1. So I took that price over at Caesars on the Ravens earlier in the week. And like we discussed a little bit, Ravens injury luck should definitely turn around over the last couple of years, or theoretically. And Lamar Jackson is at the forefront of that, especially after getting that contract extension. You have a new offensive coordinator, which should open up this Ravens offense again. In theory, you go from the stubborn, run-heavy Greg Roman, although the Ravens rushing scheme and zone rushing scheme was elite under Roman. Todd Monken, who we saw last in the NFL with the Bucs, very explosive passing offense when he was in Tampa Bay, whether it was with Jameis Winston or otherwise, and most recently at Georgia, has probably opened the door for Baltimore's passing attack. And then you couple that with the Ravens' new receiving core and arguably the best receiving core in Lamar Jackson's career. I know Odell Beckham Jr. is on the back end of his career, but Rashad Bateman coming back and potentially the healthiest he's been in a while. Mark Andrews obviously in the fold still, one of the better tight ends in the league. Zay Flowers, you get him from Boston College. there's comparisons and even some saying that he's better than Hollywood Brown. I don't know if you could go that far in terms of making the assumption at that notion just yet, but still an intriguing pickup as an outside guy or slot guy. And then Nelson Aguilar even as another depth piece, and we've seen him make chunk plays, especially recently with the New England Patriots. Then you think about this receiving core replacing the likes of Sammy Watkins, Rashad Bateman before he went down last year, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Walls, Deshaun Jackson, who didn't do much, if anything, when he came in midseason, Andy Isabella, and Demarcus Robinson, who somehow scored a breakout or a chunk play touchdown in that Bengals wild card game that we referenced. And then the Ravens pass rush too. So it's not just the receiving core. Ojabo is going to be healthy, the second round pick who easily could have been a top 15 pick the year before if he didn't tear his Achilles on his pro day. Potentially going to bring back Justin Houston, but if not, Leonard Floyd is still available. You add Rock Yassin in terms of their secondary. Marlon Humphrey is still there. You have one of the best safety tandems in the league with Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. Schedule-wise, I think it works out for the Ravens to start out hot, which would obviously cause that futures price to dip. So I'm very high on the Ravens for all the reasons I mentioned. Maybe you weren't necessarily, Mike, thinking Bengals win total under, but any potential futures position with you on Baltimore?
I sort of am out of the Ravens futures sort of market in the sense that there was a number of years back. I think they were like 8.5. I think it was Lamar's first year starting win total wise. Yep. Or some absurdly low number, I thought, and it was a very good year, as they say. But so kind of out of that market. But I would say this about Baltimore is, defensively they're going to show up. They're going to be stout. Look, you were kind of getting into the receivers, and this idea of is on Flowers and some of the stuff, and they just have competent guys now there. They have numbers there,
right?
I mean, as much as anything else, I think what you saw a team that really added to the numbers there, and frankly, they had some roster construction stuff that was going on. I think in terms of they got caught, I think a little short in terms of where their numbers, kind of needed to be at some key spots. And I think they've addressed that. And now I think they're more well suited to be able to sort of kind of go on. And I think, sort of survive a year where you've got kind of the typical injuries. And if they get some better luck, they're going to be right there. Because again, the one thing I'd say, if we take a step back, I always look at teams relative to their divisions. I think the one thing I always do is you start there, and then that everything I do starts with what I think of those other three teams. So we've talked, and we think the Bengals slight regression opportunity. We also know that Cleveland, while we think they may be better, and there's an opportunity there, we also know that what we saw from Watson was not beautiful. And we've just generally known the Browns since. I mean, and again, I'm not somebody that it's like you go back and say, oh, they've always been this way, so therefore you can't play them. But the Browns just don't have a tradition of sort of coming through in these situations. They're not the most trustworthy. So, and I do believe sometimes in the NFL and things like program wins. Teams that just out-execute, that win 17, 16 games, that get, that execute, on special teams that steal a game like that or two. Baltimore is going to do that this year, whether it's Tucker or something else in the kicking game. They're the best in the kicking game. That's another thing you've got in your pocket with them. We know that some, other teams aren't quite as sound. And Pittsburgh's an example. They've had some issues there, here and there. And we know that they, even if we like Kenny Pickett, they've got the fourth best quarterback in the division, and clearly one of the lower half of the conference sort of quarterbacks. So I think when it comes down to it, I don't know if I'll necessarily be on a Ravens future. I do think that number that you took makes sense. I think it has an opportunity to go down. And again, relative to the division, I think they've got a real puncher's chance to win it. And then the conference is so much better top to bottom than the NFC that if you get your money in at 25-1, they win the conference, and the NFC kind of falls apart, you may end up, you might be 25-1 with a 3.5, 4-point favorite in the Super Bowl if the Eagles or some of those teams don't fire, or if if the NFC completely falls apart, that 25-1, if the Ravens come through, is going to look really good. So, anyways, that's kind of the way I see it, Eli.
Yeah, no, it's a interesting and good perspective the reverse way, thinking about it. And with that all said, like you hit on a little bit, the AFC is an absolute juggernaut in comparison to the NFC. Kansas City is the odds on, or the favorite, at 6-1. Seems like the lowest price in the market at DK, FanDuel, and PointsBet, which will soon be Fanatics. Another conversation for another day. And the Bills, obviously right there, the tied at some shops for the fourth shortest odds to win it all. Cincinnati, which is a reason why I like Baltimore a lot, is because even though it's a loaded conference, the Bengals should theoretically take a step back. The Jets, we could talk about the NFL all day, and maybe on another podcast this summer, we'll get into it, Mike. I am not super high on their position, at least in the market, numbers-wise. Like we talked about, team outlook is very different from where the number is in the market, and then it's Baltimore, which is as low as 18-1 in the market, but I think that 25-1 price tag is nice. I know some people might point towards Jacksonville, but that defense, that secondary, especially the fact that I mentioned earlier, they're one of those three teams with Cincinnati and Dallas that faced either subpar or backup quarterbacks last year, among quarterbacks that ranked number 30 or below or in dropback EPA. But we hit on the NFC, or you touched on it, you teased it, and it's a really good transition into one of your favorite futures. Not sure exactly how you're going to go about this one, but how are you looking to bet one team in the NFC that is very under the radar when it comes to how people might be viewing that conference?
So, Eli, I'm a believer as a handicapper that both in horses and in the NFL, that you don't ask somebody to do too much. You don't ask a team, you don't ask a horse to do more than they're capable of doing. So, meaning, it's like being a parent, right? I mean, I think when it comes down to it, I have a 6-year-old. So I mean, there are certain things, that I can expect that he can do that'll be awesome. But it's, if I expect perfection or something, you're just going to always be disappointed. But there are certain things we can, you can do. You're like, this is great. That we're awesome. We're happy, and it's like anything else. I think you've got to be reasonable in what you expect in people and in your teams. This is a long way of saying that I like the Packers to win the NFC North at the current price that they've got, and I also like they're over 7.5 because from a win total standpoint, which I've seen out there, and it's this simple. I'm not asking them to win the conference. I think that's probably a bridge too far. So this isn't a good conference. But when I look at that division, what they have to beat, it's Chicago, which I still don't think can stop anybody. Detroit has a very similar set of defensive issues, though they've gotten better, and clearly they're the buzz team. And now their price is so short that you're really, it's, to me, I don't see the appeal. But again, I would never talk somebody out of something they felt strongly in. But I feel pretty strong.
One quick thing, Mike. With Detroit, it's so interesting because week 1, 6.5, 7-point dog, and because of all the offseason hype that you've already brought up, and we're going to see it over the next 2 months, against any other opponent, you can make the case, okay, public underdog, and not that that translates into fading Detroit or anything like that, but you would think that a lot of tickets would come in on the Lions because of all the hype that we've heard about and seen in the offseason. But they're playing the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs, so which are maybe under a touchdown favorite, depending close where you're looking, sportsbook wise, closer to kickoff. So that, you talk about the psychology of betting. We've kind of hit on that, alluded to it at least a lot during this podcast. And the betting mindset for Detroit is so interesting, especially when you think about that week 1 matchup now.
Yeah, I just, they're just difficult for me to embrace at that price with those expectations. Yeah. I think their offense shouts to me as a regression candidate, just because I think it's year 2 in that system. You know that people have gone to school on what they've done, and look, their staff, their offensive coordinator, what they've been able to do, and what Goff did, they deserve all the credit in the world. They did some things last year that a lot of teams weren't doing, and they had some really unique ways of doing it. But I mean, this is a league where people sleep on the couch, and they're reverse engineering this right now as we talk. And, the Lions have to do something completely new. And, it's been a while since they've had the weight of expectations. And so, look, I think I can understand the interest in them. I wouldn't take them. And similarly, I certainly wouldn't be rushing to take Minnesota when I think we've seen this play a number of times. And it's kind of, it just depends on what night you're gonna, is the cast gonna nail the final number and all those things. And last year I think they probably did about as well as they could. They got a lot of breaks, but I don't think anybody went into last year thinking that was going to be a great team that was going to win a lot of games, even if they got a lot of luck. I think they're a little short, and so I just keep coming back to Green Bay in the sense that I liked what I saw from Jordan Love and a little bit last year. Defensively, in a division that isn't good defensively, I think they still have, in my view, the most upside. And, we know skill position standpoint, they got better as last year went along. They're obviously going to probably emphasize the run a little bit more. We know what LaFleur is. I just don't, again, I go back to the division. I don't see anything that scares me at this point. I think it's almost it's a really square price for what I think the actual odds in the winning of the division are. The Bears are what is, you got to look at what is the Bears' path forward doing? They're going to win a lot of shootouts. That's probably what they have to do, right? Or take something would have to happen. Same thing with Minnesota. Is the path forward what they did last year? I don't know. Is there a path to 10%, 15% improvement to sort of win a different way? I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Detroit, again, I think is, the one I don't, it's such a short price. They probably have the most upside, but I would say all things considered, that's what lands me on Green Bay is that, we could look at the end of the year and say Jordan Love's the best quarterback in this division. That's not a long shot because we know what we have in Cousins. We don't know what we have in Justin Fields yet. And, Jared Goff is 50-50 to improve or regress.
I cannot wait for our producer to clip that. Jordan Love, they get isolated. But for people that are scoffing at that take and listen, maybe throw their headphones off after they hear you mention Jordan Love in that regard, that's why the price is what it is, to your point. Like, if we look at the NFC North odds board as of Wednesday night when we're recording this, and people are probably listening Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, or into the weekend before the Preakness, Packers are as high as plus 500 to win the division. And those odds are at DK, Caesars, and Revers. And head over to thelines.com if you want to get this odds board. And it's all free. You could price shop at your leisure. Bears have the third shortest odds. Vikings second shortest. And Detroit as low as plus 120. So all of that hype is baked into the number to the extreme. If they were the odds-on favorite to win the NFC North, I'd be shocked. So plus 120 seems still a little overvalued at this point, and plus 500 is a good number. And going one more quick thing too, week 1, because Packers do play the Bears in week 1. Chicago opened as a 1-point favorite. It's been steamed up to, it actually got up to 3 at some books earlier in the week, I know. And then it's pretty much settled in at 2.5 across the board. I think FanDuel has it juiced 1.5 towards the Bears. One note that I saw looking into Justin Fields, because you get the upgrade at receiver, you bring in, because they traded the number 1 pick, you bring in DJ Moore, and then they traded back even beyond that. Justin Fields last year finished 24th in quarterbacks in terms of EPA plus CPOE composite, which is completion percentage over expected. If you want a deep dive on EPA, that link is at thelines.com. And I'm actually going to have a quick write-up on a couple of week 1 games, and Packers-Bears is one of them. I can't get there with Justin Fields either. And yes, you have a sample size for Fields to work with, and yes, he's a dual threat quarterback, and you don't have much of a sample size with Jordan Love. But what we do know is LaFleur has a history of performing well when his team is. It's tough to say that this Green Bay team is undervalued or devalued in the market because we don't know what Jordan Love is, but that's why you're getting a week 1 number potentially as high as a field goal. So a key number of 3, and that's why you're getting 5-1 on them to win the NFC North.
I mean, I think it's an opportunity. Like you said, it's if you can get in on the beginning of something, it's one of the most exciting things we can try to shoot for as a handicapper in anything. To link it back to the Derby, Mage was, I think, 11-1 in his maiden race. It'd be nice to have 11-1 on a Derby winner in his first race. Somebody knew he was good because they bet him. Yeah, I'm not saying we're looking at a similar story here, but I mean, it's entirely possible we could look up at 8 weeks and it's muddled, and all of a sudden it's a much shorter number to win that division, and Green Bay looks passable, and and it's just all of a sudden you're like, well, that wouldn't have been a bad number to have. I just think there are more outs with this than there are some of the other sort of team wagers within this division. It's really unique. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I can't think of a division race like this in some time in terms of the way the board is. It's just you're being asked to express confidence in some in some things where it's a little bit unsteady, I would say, Eli.
Yeah, and it's a pretty clear-cut parallel when we think about the division as a whole to the NL Central and the AL Central in baseball. It might just suck, and the Packers might suck less than the other teams to win the division. So totally get the line of thinking there on Packers at plus 500 and over on the win total over 7.5. And that's going to do it for this edition of Beat the Closing Number. Remember to follow Mike Wilkening on Twitter at Mike Wilkening for more thoughts on the Preakness and NFL futures. Mike, any closing words before we wrap up?
Well, this was a pleasure, Eli, so I appreciate the time. I would say that when it comes down to it for the Preakness, again, it's small pool, small shots, and again, emphasize your opinion. I think you take a stand. And in the future market, we talked again, predominantly about Green Bay. Everything I talked about is, again, it centers on the way I view divisions. But I think the point of it is, and I think you do the same thing. And what I'd want to stress to anybody listening to this is that you've got to find a way to make relative value judgments about these teams, and you've got to find a way to level set. And and if you can go from there and kind of make your best logical guess at it, you at least can kind of say, okay, that's what I was thinking. I think you have to kind of do this enough seasons to kind of say, okay, I think this is a good price. And what I think this discussion kind of showed me was it gave me some food for thought about maybe how to look at some of these races in divisions a little bit differently in terms of the broader analytics. Where again, I'm someone that basically says, are the Lions in the division? If so, I might have an opportunity to look at somebody else because I'm not going to trust the Lions. But the point is, there's a lot of different ways to get to the core of the apple. That's the way I would say it.
Great way to wrap, and be sure to follow Mike for more perspective, psychological perspective on the sports betting world or the like, at Mike Wookening on Twitter. Also for the Preakness, if you want to head over to play.thelines.com to have a chance to win a bunch of Amazon gift cards in our free contests, pickup contests for baseball and such throughout the summer, NBA playoffs too, Stanley Cup playoffs for that matter, but a bunch of Preakness contests that we have going on over at play.thelines.com. But for Mike Wookening, fantastic episode on Preakness and NFL futures, and for myself, Eli Herskovich, remember to follow the Lines on Twitter at TheLinesUS. That's going to do it for this edition of Beat the Closing Number. Thanks for watching and listening. So long, everybody.